Jim, thank you so much, and a very good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have a topic that seems topical enough from the Isle of Man, maybe too topical for some of you. So let's really get started. Let's talk about cannabis companies and what the potential opportunities and challenges they essentially are associated with are there for a sustainable future. So what do we know essentially about cannabis legalization? Well, this is a fact. It's in fashion. It's in vogue. It's something that has to do a little bit with sentiment shifts, a little bit with politics, lobbying, and all that. Some countries have legalized cannabis. Go to Uruguay, go to Canada. That's legal, regulated, A-OK. Some countries, grey area. Example, US. Many countries have essentially legalized what we call medicinal cannabis. One of them is the UK. So this is a new industry. Regulatory-wise, it's very uncertain. It's a grey area still. It's evolving. And we have a lot of cannabis companies mushrooming because it's a bubble. Well, it's not a bubble yet. But it's something that, many business people believe it is a business important interest. So many cannabis companies, they say, oh, we are organic, we are green, we are eco-friendly, and so on and so forth. I'll take a rain check on that. Maybe they are, maybe they are not. We live in an era whereby identity and image is everything. That applies to the cannabis sector too. So today, this is what we'll talk about. We'll first of all begin by talking about cannabis as a plant. Some of you may already know what it is. We'll talk a little bit about the key features of the cannabis industry, cannabis companies, talk about cannabis and its relationship to sustainability, and how specifically they can contribute to the biosphere of the Isle of Man. So let's begin first with some elementary stuff. What is cannabis? It's a flowering plant. It's a genus of a flowering plant, originally from Asia. The roots of it appear to be in the region of Tibet or central West China, the place of Xinjiang and Ningxia. So the very genus has been domesticated since about 12,000 years ago, and written evidence on its usage dates back to roughly the 3rd millennium BC in China. Now, of interest now to the business community, cannabis contains a large number of compounds. Now, these are known, first of all, as cannabinoids, and these are essentially chemical compounds found inside the plant, and also some others called the terpenes, which are responsible for the flavor, the color, the aroma of the very plant. What is very important for the industry thus far are the two following ones, THC and CBD. Let's begin with each one of them. Well, THC is essentially a compound which can be produced through heating or age of the THC acid from the cannabis plant. It does contain psychoactive properties, which means that individuals consuming it will experience certain effects. Said effects include mood uplift, relaxation, some people excess laughter, and altered perception of time, and so on and so forth. Now, from a neuroscientific point of view, it motivates the brain to release what? Dopamine. Because dopamine is essentially released the minute you experience an outcome that exceeds expectations. So you feel happier than expected. Now, CBD is a lighter relative sort of THC. It can be used for medicinal conditions to provide relief for a series of those. Some of you may be aware of them. Can't mention all of them, but that includes anxiety, pain, epilepsy, nausea, and so on and so forth. There are far too many of them. No psychoactive effects. Now, how do THC and CBD impact us? Well, there is a system in the body called the endocannabinoid system that deals with the processing of cannabinoids in the human body. The system involves two groups of cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2. CB1 interacts with THC primarily, and CB2 with CBD. Now, a few more trivia about this system. It's a biological network distributed throughout the entire human body, including the central nervous tract and the brain. Now, the body essentially produces its own endocannabinoids to ensure homeostasis. And what is homeostasis? It's like you have a thermostat at home, right? So when it detects departures from well-being, what happens? It brings you back to the equilibrium, to the normal level. That's homeostasis. So what cannabis does essentially, it supplements this endocannabinoid system by interacting with it, and it helps us achieve the homeostatic outcome. It can affect our brain, it can affect other aspects of our health. Now, cannabis, in terms of classification, can comprise several subspecies. There's no real agreement as to whether they are different species, subspecies, or versions of the same. But you most likely know cannabis sativa, right? The name rings a bell. Yes, cannabis indica, which is where the THC essentially resides mostly, and the low-potency version of the plant known as cannabis ruderalis. The highest THC to CBD ratio is identified with cannabis indica. There are many strains of the same. In terms now of cannabis sativa, there are two varieties. The first one, you can call it innocent, is known as hemp. Now, what is hemp essentially used for? Many things except psychoactive outcomes. Now, why do we call it innocent? Because the percentage of hemp by law has to be less than 0.3. That's in the US, in Europe it's 0.2, I think. So anything less than 0.2 in terms of THC content is classified as hemp. What happens if you move to contents above 0.3, you get to marijuana. How high does this content go? How high would you like it? Technically, with marijuana, I've read that you can hit up to maybe 30%, but those of you in the chemistry, essentially the biochemistry business, can tell you that with synthetic products, I think we've hit as high as 85% or 90%. So, hemp is primarily stemming from the male plant of cannabis, marijuana from the female. Now, a little bit about cannabis companies. We need to do some history, not ancient history, you don't have to worry. Go back to the 60s. What happened in the 60s, the wild 60s? Yes. So, we had the first pro-legalization social movement developing. In the US, I wouldn't say the UK. What happened in the US? Marijuana in the pre-war days was deemed to be something to which immigrants were partial to. Which immigrants? Mexican immigrants. Because of massive Mexican migration in the US in the early 20th century following the Mexican Revolution. The same thing applied also to Chinese. So it used to be associated with people who were not white. But in the 60s, a lot of white people in the US began consuming it. And what happens in the US when you consume it? You get sentenced. You were about to get booked. And with many white people being booked, what happened? They were not happy. And then this is why you saw the pro-legalization movement. Now, this movement was tackled partially in the 1970s via what you probably know as the war on drugs. The war on drugs was kick-started by Nixon, I think, in his presidency. It involved several things, and much of the major anti-cannabis legislation in the US. Things went back and forth until we reach the 1990s, whereby sentiment begins to grow more receptive. And we have the first element of legalization, that's in California in 1996, that's Proposition 215E, what we know as the Compassionate Use Act. So what they said, if you have a medical condition and your doctor thinks you should take the good stuff, then you can get it. Roughly, this is what it says. It said, if you have this illness and that illness and that illness, or any other condition for which cannabis can be helpful, then you can get it. This, any other, became a catch-all. Now, legalization essentially continued throughout the US. So now we have many US states with medical cannabis legal only, recreational cannabis legal only, both of them legal or neither. Now, hemp specifically has been cultivated legally since 2014, because given the war on drugs, the prohibition fell not only on marijuana, but also hemp. The Americans, of course, discovered that by doing that, they had to rely on imports of hemp. Nothing intelligent about that. They were importing from Canada, from China. They were not happy, so they said, what's the point of making it illegal? So hemp has been legal to cultivate since 2014. In Canada, it's been legal completely since 2018. Now, what is the target market? We don't know, but we know it's huge. We know that the fraction of the global population that consumes cannabis is about 2–4%. That's quite a lot. We also know that social sentiment drives much of what's happening in terms of regulating and legalizing cannabis. By the way, that's the picture in the US right now. Some states, medical cannabis legal only, some recreational only, some both, some, the grey ones, neither. So, cannabis companies, reasons for success. First of all, it's a generational thing. Who is dominating the market these days? Gen Z and millennials. And the cultural norms have shifted. I'm not a millennial, I'm not a Gen Z. So my generation's norms were different. Younger people have different norms. And one of them is they're more likely to consume cannabis. That's the evidence we have, at least from North America. This, of course, also gives rise to certain habits. We have cannabis clubs, community farming, home cultivation. These are quite new things at the legal scale. We also have a very strong, let's say, pro-legalization lobby. Many wealthy people support the legalization of cannabis. One of the most famous of all is George Soros. In the US, there are plenty of those commissions and associations in favor of cannabis legalization, known as the Four Horsemen of Cannabis. There is also an issue, especially in North America, for social equity, because the war on drugs targeted disproportionately non-white individuals. And of course, many patients are more susceptible to demanding cannabis for their ailments. Right, so because of all these reasons, the commercialization of cannabis essentially started. So we have a lot of startups, and these are not only within the cannabis sector. There are many mergers and acquisitions between cannabis companies, pharma companies, tobacco companies, alcohol companies. Right? If you would like a brief overview, some of the main firms in the cannabis ecosystem, lo and behold. Now, why exactly are cannabis companies so successful? Because cannabis can be used for multiple applications. So especially in the case of hemp, you can use for fiber, for grains, for ropes, for oils, for anything. Just look at the different possible uses and applications of hemp. We'll talk about them a little bit later, but they involve textiles, paper, biofuels, biopesticides, auto industry, construction, and so on and so forth. So it's something that can be used legally for many different industries' purposes. If you want to know more about the potential uses of cannabis, there is this website called Cannabis. It essentially gives you a very detailed outline of those uses. And here, of course, you can see, like one picture equals 1,000 words. You can see the picture. So, how do we formally classify cannabis companies? Perhaps the most common classification I have come across is between plant touching and non-plant touching. So plant touching are those cannabis companies that deal directly with the growth and cultivation of said plants. The non-plant touching ones essentially are those dealing with ancillary services, media, tech, real estate, whatever. Contingent now the purpose of the very product on sale, you have medical cannabis and recreational cannabis. This distinction is more blurred than you might think, but let's say that it exists. And then of course you can classify them into growers, drug makers, retailers, manufacturers. What exactly are the prospects of the cannabis market? The honest answer is we don't rightly know. Different analysts come up with different forecasts and different cumulative annual growth rates. It seems that the market is growing, but because it's a regulatory grey area, the future looks a little bit uncertain. This is the global legal cannabis market forecasts for both marijuana, dark purple, and hemp, light purple.